The golden city of Hyrat stood untouched by so many conflicts. It stood as a beacon across the other great walled cities due to its pristine nature and geographic isolation. The city thrived under the iron fist of its ruler, Icus Aragos, who after his 4th year in office renamed the city Hieraticus. The brutal ruler cared little for any that lived outside of the city, commanding raids across the province to seize precious supplies and manpower from the wastelanders. Outside of the walls, he earned the nickname Icus the Slaver. Of course, Icus proved a poor tactician. Thus, his orders would have slowly crumbled the city, if it had not been for his right-hand man, Major General Alexei Dukov, who had served in the Third World War. The brilliance of his tactical mind was matched only by his cunning brutality. Raids under the command of Major General Dukov seldom took slaves, only when Hieraticus had used and spent a vast majority of its enslaved populace. You see, when Major General Dukov captured a survivor colony, he would execute half of those able to fight, then would seize all of the supplies, save for a small stockpile of food and necessities. The surviving members of the colony would then be allowed to leave, to rebuild, repopulate, and once again scavenge for much-needed supplies. The great wolf that was Major General Dukov would undeniably find them once again, once they had grown in size, and the process would repeat itself once again. For years, the survivors of the region could do nothing. No group, faction, or alliance could stand against the superior military might of a walled city. Well, that all changed on Z-Day plus 3,492. A doctor by the name of Grigory Parish had arrived in that region but a year ago, making a lasting imprint on the people of the province, providing free aid to any survivor that was in need. He had seen firsthand the draconian authority of Hieraticus and her soldiers, but due to his age, had eluded execution or enslavement every time. But, by chance, as he made the trek to a survivor colony on the fringes of the province, a small Special Forces recon team came upon him, captured and brought back to Hieraticus. Little did Icus Aragos and Major General Dukov know this simple, seemingly innocuous act would lead to the destruction of their beloved city. When Dr. Parrish failed to arrive at the colony in need, the survivors of the province could draw only a single conclusion. Their rage was harnessed by a man named Solomon Vix-Eibel, a small faction leader armed with a silver tongue and the location of an abandoned National Guard armory. Solomon and his small band of survivors sprung into action, traveling to every survivor colony across the province, promising an unimaginable host of firepower and justice against the tyranny of Hieraticus. To no surprise, as he scoured the landscape, people flocked to his cause. What started as a handful of survivors quickly grew from tens to hundreds to thousands. When Solomon was through, 6,427 people had sworn to take up arms with him. With a force of such size, he found within it a right-hand man, Lieutenant Briggs Walker, a veteran of the Third World War who had deserted his unit to shelter civilians that were not deemed fit for the walled cities. The massive host assaulted and stripped clean the National Guard armory at Delenovorsk, finding weapons for all and a small column of BTR-12 Ushanka armored transports. The stage was set, and Solomon's plan was ready to be set in motion. The position at Hieraticus was deemed impenetrable, with its only approach by land overshadowed by Mount Garbish to the south. The garrison of Hieraticus stood at 2,477 strong. The Lone Road approach was defended by the 82nd Infantry Battalion under the command of Captain Petri Walsh. An artillery battery sat atop Mount Garbush, defended by the small but extremely experienced 22nd Airborne. The remaining garrison was sprinkled across Hieraticus, either on leave or enforcing the rule of law in the city. An additional 8,223 civilians resided within Hieraticus, though Solomon deemed that they would be too soft from their years of complacency and would put up little to no resistance, if they even fought at all. Mere hours to dusk, Solomon began his assault. He would lead a small contingent up Mount Garbush to silence the artillery battery and allow his armored column safe passage towards the city. Lieutenant Briggs would take the main body of the force, supplemented by a small engineer company, to lead an assault down the deadly land corridor to the city. Solomon began his assault up Mount Garbush. Taking heavy casualties, they became pinned down by the superior fighting experience of the 22nd Airborne. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Briggs led his assault down the corridor. Their vastly superior numbers won them quick ground against the 82nd, advancing halfway to the city. Major General Dukov was away on raid, so the defense of the city fell to Icus, who ordered a mass mobilization of his garrisoned forces down the corridor. Of course, this was all a part of Solomon's hopeful plan. The mass of troops barreling down the corridor quickly became bunched up, and Lieutenant Briggs fell back with most of the men on the front lines half a kilometer, where his engineers had been digging entrenchments and laying minefields. The garrison surged towards Lieutenant Briggs's killing field, but the 82nd Infantry was ordered to hold back in entrenched positions by Captain Walsh. Meanwhile, atop Mount Garbush, Solomon enacted his own trap, as half of his force had been sent wide across the flank of the defending 22nd's position. As their force multiplier ticked to 0, the 22nd retreated to the hilltop, where the artillery batteries were located. The 22nd put up a fierce resistance against Solomon's inexperienced soldiers, meaning that he could not silence the gun batteries as promised. The corridor turned into a brutal bloodbath on both sides. The Hieraticus garrison threw waves of munitions and manpower against Lieutenant Briggs, and in kind his entrenched forces punished them for every inch of ground. And then it happened. The artillery battery atop Mount Garbush had finally sighted in the entrenched positions of Lieutenant Briggs and began pounding away at his lines. The inexperienced soldiers quickly succumbed to shell shock, and his once solid defensive lines began to break and run, and the city's garrisons began pushing further and further from Hieraticus. When suddenly, between the thundering artillery fire and chaos of battle, an air raid siren broke the cacophonous assault. Solomon had one final trick up his sleeve. While he had committed most of his forces to the frontal assault, he had readied 500 men under the command of Bartholomew Stratton in small rafts and boats to assault the city's under-fortified piers. And while Icus had robbed the city of its garrison, Captain Walsh had kept the 82nd close to the city, able to mount a rearguard defense. Stratton and his small force were barely able to gain a foothold across the pier before the 82nd launched a vicious counteroffensive. With retreat no longer an option, Stratton and his men led a valiant defense, biding time for the main force to emerge victorious along the corridor. Justice for Icus, the slaver, and the great wolf was slipping away. Then the guns atop Mount Garbush fell silent, and a radio broadcast called out to the attacking army, "Operation Ardent Hammer is green for go. I repeat, Operation Ardent Hammer is green for go." Solomon and his force had finally captured the hilltop. The 22nd Airborne had defended it to the last man and sabotaged the artillery battery when failure had become certain. But the big guns were of no consequence to Solomon. Finally, his armored column was free. The retreating members of Lieutenant Briggs' assault force rallied behind the approaching APCs and smashed apart the garrison's front lines. In full retreat, and without a distinguished senior officer, a little less than half of the garrison was killed or captured. As night fell, the fighting slowed, and new battle lines were drawn. The siege of Hieraticus had truly begun.